Ready? Here we go. I won't go over it. Just tell me when.
We're good. Go.
So, a couple things. So I think it makes some sense just to kind of go over what we talked about last, sort of the state of the state, if you will. So a couple things in terms of your challenges. You're in the midst of an Oracle conversion. And on top of that, right, you're also in the midst of a CRM selection as well as a conversion sometime later on this year, right? So from a data content perspective and using content to drive business decisions,
This one stopped.
you couldn't have a more challenging scenario, right? The other thing that you shared with us is that you're going to be adding thousands of customers in the next year. Thousands of customers that today have to be manually entered into two different systems, and there's no consistency between either one of those systems. And also what you shared with us, which is fairly common and obvious to you all as well, is that there's no single view of either clients or prospects. In either your current CRM, the envisioned view of your CRM to come, and certainly not an Oracle as it works today. And we've got some suggestions around that that will make some recommendations as well. Obviously, one of those issues is that you have a lack of ability to validate a customer at the time of inception, whether that be through the web or however else you're creating new clients, right? You've got some data issues, right? So there's no surprise there, right? So you have some issues, you're just not really sure the extent, which is the reason why we're here, right? Is to give you an idea, to give you a scorecard, to give you sort of a grading, if you will, of really how bad your content is, and then the way in which we can help you, make that better, and hopefully give you a place in which we can, continue to maintain that goodness. The other issue that I would call it a very big challenge, and it's a big challenge from a content perspective, it's also a big challenge in terms of making sure you have a process that works well. So your customers are very, very small. And they're very small businesses. They're guys in trucks that fix stuff. Now, I used to use, in 1988, Del City Wire was actually my vendor. So I owned a small telephone company in the Eastern Shore of Maryland. And so I know the challenges that you have to deal with. And that is, they're a business that starts up, or a telephone company that starts up, and difficult to verify them, and to keep that information flowing. So I get the challenges, and that's going to be unique to your business. Some of those things we're going to be able to solve for, and some of those things that is the business you deal with. But we found some great ways in which we can solve some of that stuff today. So let's talk about where you guys are today, all right? Before we get specifically into your content and what we found out, there's a Gartner I'm sure you've heard of, right? Does a lot of studies about what it costs to maintain data and content, how much it costs to correct it versus, do resolutions, but versus, prevention, right? And at the end of the day, here's where you guys are right today, right? You're in the sort of the correction mode. The whole idea of I know I got an issue, I got to fix it. And where we want to be at the end of the conversation 6 months from now, is we want you to be here. Or whether you agree with the numbers or not, because it's kind of superfluous, we know that there's a cost of it. Whether that's an opportunity cost or whether that's a real cost. We've shared with us that that there is, right? There's a lot of people involved in it, there's a lot of time involved in it, and you don't want to be on the left side of the screen. You just don't. So we're gonna show you a way in which we can get you there, right? And trust me, it's doable, right? That's the good news. So from a think of it a data management, smartness curve, I don't know how you want to describe it, automation curve. You guys are sitting about right here, which is not unusual. So and I don't feel bad. So that's okay. I mean, you're a little better than Stare and Compare, right? You've got some manual processes which to get through. And where we're going to get to, so you're sort of in the correction mode. I've got an issue. I'm fairly low down here. I don't really have any automated processes or even systems in which to help me clean up information. You know, somebody from Oracle told me that as a module I could use this clean thing from them that'll clean up their database and all that kind of stuff. We'll talk a little bit about how that may or may not be a good idea. But this is where you sit, which is okay. And really, in about 6 months from now, we're going to be here, right? And hopefully here a year from now. But this is a journey, right? It isn't, we don't walk in and say, hey, cleans your information up today. This is a journey, right? The good news is we're taking the first step. So let's take a look at that. Now, you've heard our term, you know, which you know, we've taken in your content some 60,000 records. And you've heard this term that we've used before. I think either we coined it, meaning Dun & Bradstreet, or somebody else out there. I'm pretty sure it was us, and everybody uses this term called cleanse, match, and append. I'm not sure anybody really knows what that means, but the industry certainly uses it either as a mimic of what we've coined many, many years ago, or it's just kind of a standard piece, right? But I'm going to explain to you what we did with your content, and what makes what we did to your content and the results from it, how it's completely unique to us, right? So I want to explain to you what we did, how we did it, and why it's unique. So essentially, from a cleanse match perspective, you know, it's a fancy way of saying we're gonna take your content, we're gonna put it in a format in which our systems can actually match it to the right business. That's what we're doing. Now I'm going to explain to you why, and I've massively oversimplified it, but that's essentially how it works, right? So one of the things I hear a lot, right? So I've got a lot of clients that have either gone through this process that you're going through today, or are going through it now, or you know, as a continued process. And you've heard this both from folks that claim to do similar things that we do, as well as you know, software vendors that claim to do similar things that we do, and this term called matching, and often used cleansing and matching. And really what we're talking about, do I have the right information to the right business? Have I identified that client or prospect? Like truly identified them? Not, you know, did I look good on some scale? Oh, I got a 95% match to your customer base. What does that mean? I mean, we do our own, you're not even sure what that means, but I'm going to show you why it's important to understand and make the distinction. Because matching isn't identity resolution. Identity resolution is when I'm pretty confident I've got the right business, right, to the right record. And here's why we do things slightly different. I'm going to explain to you a little bit about what we do from our process. We cleanse your information, and I explain to you what that means, because it means different things to other vendors and to other people. We identify it, right? Making sure we have the right information to the right business, called matching, right? And then we make sure that obviously continues. So here's an interesting slide. Now, don't look at it, like look at me. So this slide really is about that portion I said, cleanse, match, append, right? This is about the ugliest slide I think we have in our entire D&B arsenal. But it does tell a story, and the only thing I want you to remember from this story is that what makes what we do different than all others in the marketplace, and why what we do actually gets you to the result you want, which is again making sure you have the right information with the right business. I'm clean, if you will, right? I'm clean, I'm matched, I've gotten the right resolution, which drives your business decisions. So what I want you to remember from this is that when folks are talking about, like the Oracles of the world, or you know, I don't know, Melissa Data, or you know, Steve's data company that says they can clean your data. The first thing when they're talking about cleaning, essentially what they're talking about is postal cleaning, which is basically, is it the deliverable address? I'm oversimplifying it, but essentially you can take this database and send it over to the Postal Service, and they can say, is it a deliverable address? Cool. That's fine, pretty cool. Anybody can do that, by the way. That's not unique to D&B. What makes what we do differently is all the other things we do that we call cleaning. And the idea of, well, I'll show you the component, because I don't want to see this slide, but essentially there's 5 different components. 4 of which are more than anybody else does in the marketplace, right? Why does it matter to you? It matters to you because that means if we do a good job of actually cleaning the content before it goes into our engine, which again is unique, then you're going to get a better result, right? So no, you're going to be tested on any of this stuff. I just want you to have an understanding that why it's different. Does that make sense? You follow me so far, Steve?
Yes.
Okay, good. So on the cleanse piece, right? We're normalization. We're moving on, inks and companies. We're parsing out the information. We're moving pluralization. We're standardizing words, phrases, all that kind of stuff that's in our cleanse process, right? All good? Sound good? Again, not being tested. Nobody's going to remember all these pieces. The only thing I want you to remember is that by the fact that we do this and others don't, we get an 8 to 9% better result. Literally out of the box. We know this from our own data. If we actually took a file in from you today and it didn't run through our cleanse process, we know that it can be as bad as 14% in terms of the accurate result we're delivering, which of course means important stuff for you in terms of making sure we have the identity resolved, correct? Right? So that's what I want you to remember from the cleanse side. Steve always thinks I take too long on this side. The other piece is that once we're done with that, right, the idea of that is to make sure I have a pretty good candidate to go into this magical engine that we call matching. D&B calls matching, right? And we're not just matching to a name. So unlike others, the critical difference between what we deliver and what others cannot deliver is this thing called a referential database. Matt, what the hell do you mean by that? Well, we have 250 million records that we have on businesses worldwide. But there's records behind the records, interestingly enough, right? So I have, there's Matt's Deli. Well, Matt's Deli has been around for 35 years. Matt's Deli has probably moved a couple times. Matt's Deli has maybe changed from Matt's Deli to Matt's Polish American Deli 3 years ago. Other changes have happened in that record, and that's the referential database. Matt's Deli might actually be a trade style for MHF Inc. That's the real business. All those pieces and components that we keep in our database on a single record is part of a referential database. Why is that important? It means because if I'm using something like an Oracle or some software that does what I call merge-purge information, it has no understanding that I might be getting rid of a record that was actually valid. I might be looking for MHF Inc. Well, it's nowhere in my database. There's nothing to merge and purge it against because there's no reference behind it. In our database, you have it. And I'll explain to you why that's important, and I'll show you why specifically in your database that it actually matters. But so the concept around matching is literally, do I have the right business to the right candidate that you gave me? And I'll also say that the difference between us, again, and all others out, which makes us unique, is this idea of, is it just a match or is it a good match? And do I give you results back that can actually interrogate whether or not that's a decent match or not? And we do, and we're going to show you why. But I would say, I've heard comments before, and I've actually been through processes before where a client said, I used this XYZ vendor, and they came back with the same data, and they gave us a 95% match to your content. 95% match sounds pretty good, right? Ours was, probably 93%, 94%, whatever the case is. But that's the match conversation. It's meaningless without the stuff behind it. Because I can say, for instance, I can tell you right now that we matched to 87% of your database. Your record to our database, we matched to it, 87%. Doesn't mean anything. Because a lot of those matches are things that I would call directional guesses. Anything from between 0 and 4. With other providers, you just get, here it is, here's a black box. So with us, we're going to say, those are probably ones we want to use, okay? And that's where I think the term matching, I almost want to stop using the term, because matching is not identity resolution. What we do is identity resolution and give you the tools to help you make sure you're making good choices, right? So it's not just I matched, it's also I'm going to tell you, how good a job did we do? Like from 1 to 10, D&B, what do you think, right? And we're going to expose all that information to you so you can make good decisions about what's truly a good confidence, right? So, and these are the strains, you're familiar with this, we've talked about this a little bit, it's sort of a grading, but it even gets more granular. And again, we're not gonna get into, again, you're not gonna be tested, but, you know, I would say that in your particular scenario, you figure that out of the box, you know, a lot of people might come to you and say, oh, you know, here's this confidence codes 1 through 10, you know, 7s and above, just take them, not good enough, you know, or 8s and above, just take them, they're fine, and just ignore the rest of this stuff. And that's just not helpful, because every business is different. Your business, for instance, there are a lot of great things within your lower confidence code matches because they're small businesses that you may not see in, say, I don't know, IBM's customer file, right? So everyone is unique, and the fact that we give you the tools necessary to interrogate the uniqueness of your client base is really a huge, huge competitive advantage. Does that make sense to you? So, in addition to give you the grades, right, like every component, now this is going to get like, you know, it's going to make your head spin a little bit, but almost every component of the file, the record you gave us, is actually kind of internally graded, right? You know, A if it's the same, B if it's similar, F it's, you know, really not the same, Z essentially is, you know, missing information. Now don't ask me where we came up with the A, B, F, Z thing, I don't know, but there's a key, so if you forget, you'll know. But it literally just gives you an idea. So we call these match strings. It literally is a way to take a look at your content, you know, once we're done with this first brush and say, hey, you know, matched as a, you know, as a perfect name, but everything else is a, you know, a Z or an F, except for, I don't know, uniqueness. So I've got an A, which is the exact match that you have in your database, and uniqueness, which means it's the only name of that business in that state. It's a confidence code of 4. Well, guess what? If that's Montana, it's probably a pretty good match. So again, we want to make sure that we're actually giving you the information necessary to make good decisions. Because I don't want to have to spend a lot of time going through that correction piece at $100 a record, right? Does that make sense? Okay. So we're going to give you all that stuff. Now let's take a look at yours, specifically, right? Here's your grades. I kind of gave you a heads up on some of this, but we had about 60,000 records. Matched records, again, I call this a meaningless number because it's one of our terms, but it really is not. Is that client identification? The answer is no. Even at the 62%, which is the 7 to 10s, you know, the fact is that's not horrible. I mean, I took a look at, spent a lot of time with your file, hours with it, with myself and the other specialists. We went through the opportunity areas, and I will tell you that I was surprised in that it was as good as it was, because you have so many small businesses in there. So we were able to confidently match at a fairly high confidence code, which is a good starting point to take a look at how we're going to resolve some of these issues. But I would say, you know, like, don't panic. It's not bad. It is an 87%. I know you didn't expect that. And it's not really all that bad. So, and we've found some great ways in which we can fix it as well. In terms of your concern about duplication, yeah, you have some. Not surprisingly. So anywhere from 3 to 5%, depending on how you take a look at what confidences those codes are. But, you know, plus or minus, yeah, you've got some. But again, we've given you some reasons as to why we can fix some of that or help you through it. Just another way of looking at the same sort of thing, right? 62% match rate, confidence codes 7s and above. And again, I don't want you to have the impression that those are automatic accepts. We're going to get eyes on those to make sure that those actually make sense. And I have, frankly, so we're clear, I did look at a lot of them, 7s and 8s and 10s and 9s. Good, and there's a lot of good 5s and 6s, and I'll show you some examples of that. Any questions at this point? Good? I'm not going to go through this as sort of a cumulative piece. We can talk about these later, and I'll have those in the decks. But what I'm going to do now is really talk a little bit about your actual examples. And so Steve and Karen, I have a few examples. And we'll put them up on the screen as well. just let me tell you what you're looking at. So you're going, wow, okay, that's interesting. This is the first one. And yes, I've got some handwriting, but this is actually, the top part is your actual record. So it says, account number, the name of the business, PO box. That's actually your record that came in, right? And then the one right next to it is obviously the D&B record. You also notice at the top here, and by the way, you'll have 25 examples at a minimum per confidence code when we actually give you your reports back, right? And we'll sit down and go through some of them that are relevant, but you'll have lots of truly real-world examples of your content, right? That sound good to you? So here's one of the things I like to pull out. So this is a confidence code of 5. Now, if I were just using the old school way of just anything below a 7, I just throw out as useless. I don't get to that resolution, that identity resolution, very quickly. That means I got eyes on a lot of stuff that maybe I shouldn't have eyes on, right? So one of the things that we're going to do, again, is it's a journey, not a destination. But let's make it a 10-mile journey, not a 200-mile journey. Does that make sense? So any way I can find a way in which to make that journey shorter and still maintain the accuracy, makes sense, right? Okay. So here's one of those steps. So what I did is, and I didn't spend hours and hours and hours on it. This is a pretty close brush. You're going to spend some more time with us on this as we move this project forward. But there are 581 examples of records that have that match string. Let's go back real quick. Of a similar match string. All right? 581 examples. That was that. Again, you're not going to be tested, but I'm going to show you what I mean by string. So, this B, Z, Z, A, Z, Z, A, F, Z. There's 581 of those, right? I don't have to go look at every one of those records. You can possibly, depending on what they are, and I've made no determination on this particular record, but it's clearly a match, right? So if you take a look at it, Harley bus sales, it's in Whitehall, Montana, all right? Name is very different, right? But what have I done here? Harlow's bus sales, Harlow's school bus service. Well, that is what they have in the database. There's actually the real name. It's in Montana, different, P.O. box, different. Name, I've got a telephone number. So here's what I matched on. The name's, it's okay. But here's the stuff. We're in Whitehall City, Montana. Not many of those, that's an A. Montana A. You get into the density. Not many businesses like that. Well, of course, it's easy to do in Montana. But you see where that is a match. That's a 5. You might want to actually take a look at, I'd get some eyes on more of these. But my guess is, based upon where these are, and the fact that your business are typically small, that match string might be something you just say, yeah, I'm going to accept those. Go
Are you
ahead.
saying I can take certain kinds of 5s only?
No, there could be many different types of strings. So this is just one example. There's 581 examples of this exact match. There are literally 4.2 million different match string combinations possible, right? Clearly, we're not going to go through all that. But what I am looking for is match strings that seem to, based upon my client information or prospect information, seem to have a pattern that's probably acceptable. This seems to be one of them, right? We're going to be looking for that as this project moves on. Again, I want on a 10-mile journey, not a 100-mile journey. I might be able to get rid of, 7% of my non-match records right now, my non-acceptable match records right now, 8%. I'm going to add 581.
Gotcha, that's what I meant by taking only certain kinds of 5s, certain match grade strings.
Yep. What I don't want to do? I don't want to find, 200 examples of ones, right? Why? I mean, I might as well look at every record. I want, and I've got an example, I think, of one that's just, let's go back. I've got an example of another one that has 730 records, different match string, but again, 730 records. In this exact same match string, obviously it's not the same company, but again, different type of match strings, But that looks awfully, looks pretty darn clear that that's probably the same one. The physical address is different, but the city and state are the same. So we can analyze the zip and density to find a match. Even though the rest of it's kind of a poor match, that's clearly a match. Now this is a 6, but again, we're giving you the information, and this is uniqueness, right? There are other things that also make this unique from a match perspective, and one of it has really to do with this thing called match data profiles, or we call it MDP, and I hate using the acronyms, but the fact is it is. And so, and this is unique. So, and this also goes back to the whole idea of, you know, the reference file, right? The match reference file. In this particular example, you can see that literally when we gave your record, if you see here, trade styles, right? 5,336, right? Out of what you gave us. That means out of the 60,000 records you gave us, we match in a trade style. If I don't have a referential database, you know what I match on? Nothing. I don't have anything to match it against. Which means if you're using anything other than us, or Hunt and Peck, right? Those aren't resolved. That becomes a 1,000-mile journey. But because we have the referential database, which is, again, is unique to what we do, those are matched. Some other goofy ones, right? CEO name, you know, some other things that are part of that process. Again, that points out how unique it is to have a referential database, and what makes us unique, right? Couple other examples. So I'm going to give you a perfect example. Again, I'm repeating myself really, because this is also the use of our match data profiles, right? With it somewhere behind the record. In this particular case, we're looking at the input record that you gave us, right? Bloomingdale Fire, right? The business name is actually Township of Bloomingdale. The doing business as, which again, that's the match reference file. Bloomingdale Fire Department. No address, Bloomingdale, right? So you wouldn't find that if you're doing a merge purge in an Oracle software scenario, or Melissa Data, or whomever. You're not going to find that, right? Same thing down below, executive name, right? Now that may even be transparent, but it's back behind the file. We matched to it because Lloyd Shaw was the business name, the executive name is the business name, everything else seems to match pretty well, right? Again, 59,330 total records that we wouldn't have, 5,900, that wouldn't match to without a match reference file. See where that's important?
Yes,
See where that really makes a difference?
yes.
So the idea of just saying, I can clean your stuff is probably not all that accurate, right? So the truth may be kind of boring, right? Because it's a lot more exciting for me to say, you know what, Steve, I took your file in, and I got 95% match rate. Here you go. Well, that's great, but you're going to spend the next 3 years figuring out what you just did wrong, right? So other ways, examples of this, former names. This is really cool. I think this is the really cool stuff. Because in our database, give me an example, real world example. My family owned a business in Baltimore called Alexander Brown and Sons. And if I go look for Alexander Brown and Sons, you know, in our database, and look it up on that street in Baltimore, it's not been Alexander Brown and Sons for a long time. As a matter of fact, it's changed names 2 or 3 times. 2 times to be exact. But I go look that up in our database, or more importantly, give it to me as a match, it'll show me that it's Deutsche Bank every time. How is that possible? That has been that name forever. Or that address. Well, it's the address. How is that possible? It's the match, it's the reference database. It's the data behind the data. Again, maybe I'm pounding, you know, making that mountain out of molehill, but this is really sort of it. So another example, similarities between 2 businesses. And I can give you a sort of example after example. Actually, I think that's the same example. Former name, we just talked about. Again, the idea of you know, understanding the differences. You know, something a merge purge will not. Also, a merge purge will not do, or that type of cleaning, if you will, has a tendency to actually make your content worse than it does better. And the good news is you'll have fewer records. The bad news is you might be eliminating a whole bunch of records that actually you want to keep, right? or merging records that have no business being merged together at all. Make sense? Okay. There's just some counts in terms of duplicates, and I just show you this as sort of a interesting, you know, like, we're not going to base our project on this, but you know, you might find out that you have 9 instances of this particular vendor or this client, right? 5 of this, 6 of that. Literally, you've given it to us 9 times, but it is the same record, right? That may have an impact, it may not have an impact. But to know it, as you said, you know, we have about a 3 to 5% duplication rate, and you want to make sure you have those all in one spot for a whole host of reasons, right? For opportunity areas as well as risk, right? Again, same thing. Just a way, again, giving you a vision or a view or insight of what having good content can actually tell you about what's going on in your business, right? Does that make sense? So we've gone from the whole idea of giving you the idea of what we do from a client's perspective, matching what we're unique about, into actually showing you some thoughts and ideas about why having that content is insightful, right? So, and that's about what we're going to go to. So we've kind of come full circle. We've shown you what we've got. We've shown you sort of the process that we took your content through. And now we're going to kind of give you some nice little teasers. I don't know if teasers or not, but certainly insight into what you could do, right? Not that you would, but some interesting information. So for instance, out of the records that were at a high confidence code, roughly 32,000 records, right? Only 24,000 of them are what we call marketable records. Now, is that shocking to you? Probably not, because most of your businesses are small businesses, right? So, in order to be a marketable record, I have to have all kinds of neat stuff. I need to have an industry code. I have to have a telephone number. I have to have a contact number. Obviously, city, state, all that kind of stuff. But I have to have all those components in order what we call a marketable record. Is this surprising? Not really. Not horribly. Is there a business reason to have all that information on those records? There might be, right? There might be. So, but I can identify. I know that out of those records that are highly matched, highly identified, I'd like to call it, there's 5,000 I probably don't have enough information on. I probably should, right? Again, kind of the obvious, right? 86% of your businesses are 1 to 5 employees. Again, those are nice things, but you know, there's some other opportunity areas as well. Did you realize that you had 2789 of, you know, sort of medium-sized businesses? You know, the one on the end there is the 100 or plus, or mostly schools and the like. I've already looked at those pieces. But that's an area in which you said that you didn't think you had many of, and you do. So, some other things that I always find interesting, industries, none of this should surprise you. Business services, you know, electrical work, it tells you sort of, you know, the number of accounts of those industries within your file. Again, insight, is that helpful? Yes, it can be. It can be very helpful in terms of identifying target markets in which you already do business with. Can you do that with your content today? The answer is no. So when you enhance the content with, you know, making sure we have the right information to the right business, you got the right record, now it can start to leverage some of the content that we can fold in on top of yours to help do things like segmentation, marketing campaigns, you know, penetration analysis, all those types of things. You currently don't have any of that content to do, right? Does that make sense? Other things that I always found really interesting, I'm going to skip through this one. No, I won't, actually. The one I would ignore would be the United States government. You know, so you do something, so there's, you know, the largest tree in the world, which is 61,000 members. So the reason why I show this is really to give you an idea of both, I would say, risk and opportunity, but since we're talking about the marketing department, it really is about opportunity. Were you aware that, you know, out of this particular industry, or no, out of this particular company, or these companies, they have lots of family members. Are you doing business with them? Did you know they were related? So you have this great relationship with John's Electrical Services in Towson, Maryland. Did you know that he's part of a conglomeration that actually has 17 other stores, one of which is in Corvallis, where you have a rep that you never called on? No. How would you know that? Well, you know it now, and you know it because now you have that information embedded into your content. So just some ideas, right? Again, this is your content. We've just showed you some ideas in which, there are probably some opportunity areas, right? To help you, think outside the box of just cleaning the information up for the point of cleaning it up, right? Again, another slide that talks a little bit about, back that up, a little bit about how, much of yours actually has family members, right? Any other thoughts or questions? Again, we've gone through your cleanse, match, conversation, identity resolution really, what makes it very unique in terms of how we would handle that versus others in the marketplace, why that's important in terms of getting the right resolution, giving you some examples of what you might do with some of the content in which we might be able to provide back for you for analysis purposes. And then sort of the next thing we want to do is kind of give you an idea of what we would suggest, right? Is everybody comfortable with that thought? Okay. So, a couple of recommendations. So, as I said before, not horrible, right? Love to walk in and say, 95%, you really don't need us. That's not the case. You knew that, right? The good news is there's a path, right? And let's take a smart path. As I said, it's a journey, you knew that, right? But I want that journey to be, 10 miles, not 10,000 miles. So anything we can do in terms of making sure you have the right resolution, giving you recommendations in terms of how to properly evaluate your content, giving you some ideas and how to increase that, I think is helpful, right? I mean, you would want that. So here are my suggestions. One is that the file that you gave us didn't have any telephone numbers, right? Not your fault, but if you've got them, use them. And the reason why we know that is because it's possible. So when we actually take this project on officially, then what I would ask you to do is make sure you have telephone numbers in that section. Does that make sense? Can we do that? Mm-hmm. Where you've got them. The second thing is I would say, look, you got a second address, use it. Because we'll use it. That has the ability to increase the actual high confidence rate significantly. Between those two things, although I don't have a number on it, I know you can look at a 7% better match rate if you include phone numbers, which is good. Actually, what's the interesting part of it is not even just matching to a number. It sometimes will take a 5 to a 9. I know that sounds simple, but then again, do I have a lot of eyes on 9s? No, I don't. So, again, a way in which to make that journey not 10,000 miles, 10 miles, right? Obviously, we're going to take a look at your match strings. We talked about that before. I've already looked at that before. There's some gold in there. We can eliminate some of those, like 500, 700 at a time, and just get rid of those, right? One is really interesting. So, I would also, when you give us your file, I would also make sure you prioritize those customers based upon some numeric value. Now, whether that, and whatever is important to you, and since I don't know what that is, I would say here's the outcome, right? What I'm looking to understand is if it's a client that bought a box of 3 pair of wire from me in 1988, and I still don't have my system, but their confidence code of 3, then I probably don't want to spend hours and hours and hours and hours at $100 a correction on that client, right? Probably don't want to do that. So what I would like to do then, I would like to see you do as a column in one of the file, is actually put some sort of a value associated with the client. So that way, when we're actually evaluating the resolution of those, we're not spending hours and hours on clients that you don't care about, right?
You mean we're not, our data stewards are not?
Correct. So, but that's our next recommendation, right? So, you have kind of a process now. You have something identified that's sort of doing the manual process. But to be very clear, none of this works. So the thought that somehow that we're going to take this, clean it up, sit down with you for a few minutes, hand it to you, and this is going to be done, and you'll never touch it again, that's just not realistic, because that's not going to happen. Especially with 1,000, we're going to add 25,000 new customers this year. So we got to do a couple things in terms of changing your process. One of which is you got to have a steward program. You need to take, Amy, who's doing it on the front end side, and make that part of her job. Whoever it is, somebody's got to be doing this. So, so we've given you a couple recommendations. Obviously, the first thing we're going to do once we get it back is we'll eliminate your duplicates. You're going to need somebody to have to implement that kind of information. And then I would say the biggest thing, going back to, sort of the the issue you have in terms of not being able to identify content or a customer at the beginning is this whole idea of search before create. Now, we can talk about this further in terms of what that would mean, services or whatnot, but I would say that that is a critical component, especially at your high volume. I want a scenario in which whatever system I'm using, whether it be Oracle or your new CRM, that when I'm typing that information in, I'm giving a list of candidates, viable candidates that is presented to me in the tool that I use, and select those. So that at least I have, I'm verifying at a point of inception, and then deal with the exceptions after the fact, right? If you're not doing that, that's not in the budget, whatnot, I have to have some way, at least, I can clean up the mess you created every quarter. So at the very, very least, this process in terms of cleansing and matching and appending your content needs to be done at a minimum on a quarterly basis, right? I don't like cleaning up stuff afterwards. And the reason why I don't like cleaning up stuff afterwards is because it gets me to this, right? As I said at the beginning of this conversation, we're here, right? We're here. We want to be here. So, what I don't want to do, any of the steps, if I do the search before create, I'm here all the time. Again, whether or not I, believe in these numbers or not, I'm here all the time, right? And what I don't want to be is this. And by the way, this is not going to cost you this. But, so, and then there's the big why, right? So I just clean up stuff for the purposes of cleaning up stuff. I mean, it drives my business decisions. I want to make sure I have the right business, right information with the right business. And why? So you're probably wondering what I drove this up for. Anybody care to guess what that is?
No.
Okay, good. So 2012, Fortune 500 companies that use D&B sales and marketing solutions, which would include identity resolution, have an average growth rate of 9% higher than all others in the field. That's the reason. So we're experts at this, and we're here to help. So the next steps. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt.